We get a lot of questions about metal roof gauges. So today we're going to talk about typical metal roof gauges and how they apply to different materials. What's up guys, I'm Thad Barnett from Sheffield Metals. Welcome to the Metal Roofing Channel and welcome to another Q&A Mondays. It's a great day here on the channel. Got Lori Reynolds-Morrow, Adam Mazzella, and Jeff Hawk back with me on the episode here. We're talking about metal roof gauges and kind of what that means on a typical metal roof system. So tell me a little bit about this, guys. What are metal roof gauges?
Well, metal roof gauge is really the thickness of the material used. When it's specific to steel, that's really when you hear the name gauge or the verbiage gauge to describe how thick the metal is. Typical gauges for standing seam metal roofs usually are 22 to 26. Other metal roof types, steel metal roof types that you'll see in terms of thicknesses really are the face fastened systems. You'll see 26, 28, 29 gauge. Those are, again, mostly face fastened, 36-inch wide type panels, things like that. In really high-end applications or industrial applications, you might even see heavier than 22 gauge. So just really depends on the type of system, whether it's standing seam, face fastened. The most common gauge for standing seam metal roofing, whether it's residential or commercial, really is 24 gauge by and large. And that's not Sheffield specific, I'd say that's pretty industry specific.
So for steel, you mentioned a range of gauges. What side of that range is the thickest?
So the lower you go, it's actually thicker. The higher you go, it's actually thinner. And that gauge, or when you're talking about 24 gauge, for instance, we're calling it an 023 min. That's prior to paint being added to it. So, and that's not even the thickness of the cold rolled core, or the substrate that's in there. That cold rolled is coated by Galvalume or AZ50 coating that is actually adding additional thickness to it. So you got to kind of think of it like a sandwich. So you've got cold rolled steel, which left exposed is just going to rust out. And then you've got a thin coating of Galvalume. You'd have AZ25, AZ25 on either side of that, which comprises that AZ50 product. And then prior to the painting, you would have your .023 min finished substrate. That includes the coating. Certainly going to pick up a little bit of thickness when you add the paint on it as well, if you go with a painted finished product. So in our world, AZ50, when you're talking about steel, is kind of the gold standard for a painted product, AZ50 for a bare product, and that's AZ50 and AZ55 Galvalume. That's where you find a warranted product. There are products out there that are thinner than that look the same, that in all, for all purposes behave the same, that are warranted on the substrate level. It could be a galvanized or a G60, G90. It could be an AZ35. Those are even out there. So you want to check with all your manufacturers, before you go and buy a roof and say, wow, this is a smoking deal. Well, it could be an inferior substrate. It could be an AZ35, an unwarranted type of system. And that can be in, standing seam world, or it could be in the face fastened metal world.
So how are other materials measured? Are they also measured in gauge? What about like aluminum?
Aluminum is measured in inches. And the speak that we usually use is 032, 040, 050, 063. But that's actually 0.032 inches and on up through the scale. And typically metal roof systems are 032 or 040.
So you mentioned aluminum roof panels are often 032, 040. What about some of the thicker aluminum? What are those thicknesses used for?
Sure. The thicker aluminums you will see in edge metal systems, roof curbs.
The other thing about aluminum thicknesses is when you're talking about 032, it's not just 032 min or .032 min. Oftentimes there's a range there. So 032, could be from .028 or .029 all the way up to .033. And one of the things that'll kind of dictate that allowable range is also the width of that coil that it originated from. So there's a little bit more things to it, but Again, the thing that you really kind of got to focus on when you're talking about O32 and let's say an engineered system is the material you're using, meet the requirements of the engineering.
So yeah, let's talk about engineering. Tell me a little bit about how the thickness of the metal, gauges, O32, etc., aluminum, how that relates to engineering.
Probably the most commonly tested gauge in steel is 24 gauge. For aluminum, most commonly tested thicknesses is 032 and 0.040. When it comes to engineering, you want to make sure that just because you have an engineered system, you want to make sure that the gauge obviously meets that engineering, and all the components and accessories that are included in the system are all, per the engineering report. One of the things we get a lot is, say you have a 24 gauge, 18-inch wide panel tested. With that engineering, you can go and you can use a heavier gauge material or a narrower width panel, and your test report's still going to be applicable. Because obviously a thicker material, is in theory is stronger, and the narrower the panel, technically the stronger it is as well when it comes to uplifts, because you are, there's not as much panel width that wind and things like that can get under. So you can always go heavier and narrower, but you can never go lighter and further apart.
Because like on a narrow panel, the clips are closer together, so that allows the feel of the panel to maintain its.
Correct. There's not as much. There's not a wider area, so there's more structure holding that roof panel down.
Right.
And beyond that, you're obviously not going to be able to submit a aluminum test report for steel or steel for aluminum or vice versa. Even though like an O32 steel, and we get this question all the time, hey, can I just submit your O32 engineering for this 22 gauge? No, 22 gauge decimally is about 030, 0295, somewhere in that range. And our O32 is going to meet that thickness, but 22 gauge is going to way outperform the O32 aluminum just from a structural capacity.
Right.
O32 or just aluminum in general for architectural metals is significantly more malleable, not nearly as rigid or as strong as steel. So.
And that same thickness of aluminum is much lighter than steel as well, correct?
Exactly. O32 steel is going to be a little bit less than a half a pound. That's a really common thickness for residential. 24 gauge steel for residential is going to be about 0.95 to 1 pound per square foot.
Right.
So pretty significant difference in the weight of each product as well.
So I have a question about paint systems. Why are some paint systems exclusive to certain gauges?
I wouldn't say it's so much exclusive. It's more probably the greater common thing that happens. 24 gauge is almost exclusively PVDF or Kynar coated product. You can still get SMP in 24 gauge. As you start getting lighter, you start trending more towards SMPs or silicon modified polyesters. However, we also paint 26 gauge with a PVDF. And we do this because it's more of a premium product for people that want that little bit thinner of a roof. It's going to save them some money there. Similarly with aluminum, pretty much anything O32 on up to the heavier aluminum thicknesses, traditionally going to see PVDF. When you start getting lower than that, you're usually looking at rainwear goods type systems, gutter coil, end caps, downspouts. Those traditionally are made out of polyesters and SMPs. So,
Okay.
Usually the thinner the metal, it's kind of a cheaper the system, but not always the case. I mean, you can paint a premium Kynar on the thinnest metal you can get, or you can get a really cheap paint system on something else. But a lot of it depends on the application, the industry, and really what's most common. So
we've talked about steel, we've talked about aluminum. How are other materials measured?
So just specific to kind of the metal roofing world, the most common other types of metal roofs that you'll see are zinc and copper. Zinc is traditionally more of a European product, and it happens to be measured that way. So you'll see it really measured in traditionally millimeters or tenths of a millimeter. So most common standing seam applications are 0.7 or 0.8. As you get heavier, you get into 1 mil or 1.5 mil. Those are usually for ornate facades and wall systems and
Okay.
things like that, things that are made on a break, and you're not really going to see those really thick ones on standing seam applications traditionally. And copper is measured really by its weight. It's 1 foot or 1 foot by 1 foot or 1 square foot weight. So traditional copper items for standing seam would really be 16 ounce and 20 ounce. So that 1 square foot piece would be 16 ounces, or it should weigh that much. A 1 foot by 1 foot piece of 20 ounce should be essentially 1.25 pounds. So you can go on up. I mean, there's a lot of, you can talk about copper and zinc. You know, when you start getting in that world, it's mostly accent pieces, but there are opportunities for real high end standing seam metal roofs in those products
Right.
as well. You know, when it comes to other high end roofing types, there's stainless steel. That's traditionally covered by gauge as well. So whether it's domestic or import product in the United States for stainless, that's also gauge.
Cool. Well, thanks, guys. I think we covered a lot with metal roof gauges and how to measure other materials. Comment below if you have any questions. Subscribe to the Metal Roofing channel. Anything else, check us out at Sheffield Metals Online, and we'll catch you next time.